The events of the last few days must mean that no sane thinking person in the UK can now be in any doubt as to the hypocrisy of our Prime Minister and his Chancellor of the Exchequer, bosom pals in the quest of supporting the bankers, multinational companies and self-appointed bureaucrats of Europe. We can't be surprised by that. They've demonstrated their desire to lie to us, straightforward lies, to suggest that our future lies within this organisation. They've not only denigrated a man who, seeing their attack on the most vulnerable people in our society, in favour of a tax bonus to those much more fortunate, saw one of their colleagues denigrated heavily for resigning in protest. But the media have done nothing but ask themselves whether or not this is damaging to Osborne's opportunity or ambition to become Prime Minister, and whether or not this means the end for David Cameron. There's no question in their minds, for example, that these two people have indulged in what might be termed as criminal disregard for the welfare of the British population. I don't think it's too strong to say that. I mean, it's easy to sit back and say, well, of course, Ian Duncan-Smith's motivation was a desire to leave Europe. Let's ask ourselves this. It may well be. I can think of no good reason why the man shouldn't want a platform to suggest that we move out of this ridiculous organisation and fend for ourselves. What other country in the world, for example, is better qualified and able to stand on its own? We demonstrated that endlessly in the past, and I don't want to go into that again. But it's quite clear that the European, let's call it experiment, let's not advance some sort of conspiracy theory, let's just call it an experiment for the conduct of the affairs of a number of the nations of Europe in collaboration with each other within what we voted for originally in 1975 as the common market. Now, it's failed. Everybody can see it's failed. I mean, there was a time not that long ago when 55% of our trade was with Europe. Now it's what, 45%? And still going down. And the only section in the world of, in terms of industry and national product and so on, that is in fact failing, and where the economies are on a downward spiral, and that's Europe. I mean, there's no question about it. Why we should want to be part of it, I can't imagine, as I've mentioned on a number of occasions. But it's not just a question of, and there are people much better able than I am to spell out individual item by individual item why it's illogical for us to remain inside. It's just so overwhelmingly clear that A, we're being hoodwinked, or the attempts being made to hoodwink us. B, it's perfectly obvious that these people are prepared to do anything, and I mean anything. For example, the absolutely awful atrocity in Brussels today. How long do you think it will be? It will be interesting to watch and listen before they won't do it immediately, obviously, because they're too clever for that. But let's leave it a week or so, and they'll be using that and other atrocities, Paris, etc., as examples of the need for us to stay together. We'd be much safer. Cross-border police information, all of which existed prior to this so-called union. But we really must. We must stay in Europe. When in reality, the only fear we need to have, sure, we need to fear terrorism, because whether we like it or not, we're living in a world where terrorism is a almost daily occurrence. Sure, we're entitled to be worried about that. But our membership of the EC will make no difference whatsoever. Or, I should say, membership or otherwise will make no difference whatsoever to the threat that we're under. None at all. But we've got a useful intelligence service, and we will collaborate with the other countries of Europe without any question to try to forestall terrorist attacks. But it will be argued, and I'm pretty sure of this, just as I was, that Osborne would use the budget speech as I indicated, which you'll see, and you now know, of course, he did. But there's little doubt they'll use any atrocity as an excuse for us to stay inside the Union. What I'm most concerned about, I suppose, are two things. Firstly, why we're so convinced we're unable to stand on our own 2 feet. Look at it objectively. What country in the world has got a better history and which country has stood on its own in the world more effectively than us? What population or collection of countries in the world has better defended itself, fought against oppression and etc. in 2 world wars and in many other respects than the UK? Why on earth anybody in this country should want us to pretend that as the 5th biggest economy, as the 4th biggest armed forces, etc., etc., with English-speaking, common legal approaches to many other countries, why should we want to avoid trade deals and all the rest of it with any country in the world? And why would it be supposed that, considering that once upon a time we occupied most of the world as our empire, that we're incapable of negotiating with these people for new trade deals? There are none. There's no argument that says we are incapable of doing that. And to try to suggest that we are, and bear in mind, these are the so-called leaders, political leaders in our country, are actually stating that they, or we, are incapable. We don't have enough inventiveness, skills, education, training to set about determining our own future. Now, I think this is a scandalous statement. Now, when Ted Heath was flying about Europe saying that we should join, and de Gaulle was going non, non, non every 5 minutes, I remember thinking at the time, this bloke Heath is making himself look an idiot. He's suggesting that all the capacity of the British people couldn't stand on its own. But of course we can stand on our own, and there's no question we should. So I'm looking forward to the day when we finally make up our minds. The reason I keep making these little videos, not that anybody's much going to listen to me, but because I keep making them, because for God's sake, somebody's actually got to say something about this more loudly. Now, Alan Johnson, who's in charge of the Remain in campaign for the Labour Party, has said, and I'll quote what he said if I can find it. He said that he's been struggling to find simple phrases which would resonate with the voters to suggest we stay in the European Union. Now, I have to tell you, Alan, and I also have to say that I believe this man has demonstrated his integrity on more than one occasion, that the reason he's struggling to find any appropriate phrases to encapsulate the logic of staying in is because there are none. It simply doesn't exist. There's no possible. I believe that the Labour Party, and I'm not accusing Alan Johnson of this, but I believe the Labour Party happens to believe that one of these days there might be some sort of international Soviet where Europe is swept by socialist ambitions, where the terms and conditions of being employed suddenly rise from the mist, and they're applauded for, or Europe is applauded for protecting the working man. It's nonsense, of course. Any potential for a European socialist movement is long gone. It'll never come back again. The people who are in charge, who are not elected, the people who run Europe, they're not elected, and they won't be elected. So this is what we are actually watching is an attempt for not the left, but predominantly the right, or the wealthy, or the establishment running all of us. And naturally, the pretty boys of British politics are very happy to see that happen. What you do is once you've finished your term in office, it won't be very long for Cameron and Osborne, you simply trot off to Europe into a nice little number where you paid a fortune. And if you don't like what's happened in the UK, well, so what? You can go and live somewhere in the sun, as I've described it before. But this is what we are actually being asked to sanction. Now, I've no doubt at all, as I said before, now just watch the newspapers, the television, etc., and listen to the new bid that will be made to get us to stay inside the EU based on security in view of the atrocity which occurred in Brussels. These people will sink to any depths to try to achieve this. You have to suspect it. I believe I said in one conversation that if the government says to me, in order to go from A to B, go out of the gate and turn left, I am immediately inclined to go out of the gate and turn right. We can't trust these people. And again, as I've said before, once we've opted out of the European Union, we have to set about reorganising our affairs in such a way that our government represents us, and that the people who are doing that representing are of the calibre we require. Don't think for a moment that there are none in this country. It's just that it's not possible to make your way to the top of a political party if you're honest. Now, I'm going to say no more, and I might say no more on the subject at all, because I have to say that the recent events with the budget and Cameron's lies to the fraudulent claims for Europe, etc., etc., Osborne's obvious attack on the most vulnerable people, as I've said, for which he ought to be sacked. He should have been sacked immediately after he uttered it. But no, he and his cronies control the Conservative Party, and And there are this host of people. Oh, yes, Mr. Cameron. Yes, Mr. Cameron. They won't argue. They won't argue in case they think that there's anything detrimental to their personal future involved in obviously opposing ridiculous legislation that's totally unnecessary. Now, I'm not a socialist. I'm not a conservative. I wouldn't join UKIP. I'm not a Liberal Democrat, because a lot of the things they've said have been absolute rubbish. And as I pointed out, I wouldn't vote for this lot, whoever they are, by political persuasion. I wouldn't vote for them if they were the last people on earth. We can do without these people, but we have to get out of the European Union so that we can, in fact, demand from our politicians legislation and treatment and behaviour that is in keeping with the British tradition. We can't do this now. And that doesn't mean that I want to go back to the days when there were double queues and all the rest of it. My father told me all about those. He stood in them. He actually knew what they were like. He told me all about them. So I'm not in favour of any of that, nor do I believe it's necessary in this country. But the people of this country have to wake up. We have to realise that we're being sold a pup, or are the attempts being made to sell us a pup. Don't be fooled. Whatever you do, wake up and realise these are third-rate people who have a vested interest in supporting, as I've said, the banks, the multinational companies, and the self-appointed bureaucrats of Europe. They have an ambition to become part of that group. That group's never going to be thrown out at an election. This is the most undemocratic structure outside Russia. So, yeah, sure, there are other countries in the world that behave in a totalitarian manner, but I don't want to be part of a totalitarian Europe. I'm quite happy to see us trading with anybody in the world, and there's no reason we shouldn't. We're quite capable. We have enough ingenuity to allow ourselves to do that. The only fear we need have about making this decision is the fear of staying inside the damn thing. That's where the danger lies. The euro's going nowhere. The so-called union is going nowhere. And you know, before it even crops up, that Turkey will be invited in. They'll invite anybody in if it means they can grab more revenue and more control over a greater number of people. So, I'll leave it there. I shall watch developments in the next week or so with great interest. But I can say, I think, no more. If something happens dramatically, then I might be tempted to say something, but I'm astonished by the level of, or lack of, integrity and honesty of the people who supposedly represent us. I'll say no more. Thank you very much.